Okay, guys, you guys are back?
Yes, sir.
All right, I've already started back the recording, so we're picking up where we left off before the break. All right, so as I said before, the framework that we're looking at here in this text is really um, to look at the relational leadership model. And a lot of this, as I said before, is dependent upon the psychology and educational framework that was developed by these gentlemen here. A lot of their work has influenced the relational model that we're about to start to begin with. And it requires that we spend a lot of time learning about ourselves, um, learning about how people perceive us, which is self-awareness in the context of others, and understanding our personal value structure, beliefs, and what we hold to be the most important elements in our lives. Now, that development starts, of course, as I said, with the development of self-awareness. Now, there is a presentation that is going to take place on chapter 4, which is the first presentation on understanding self. So that's going to cover the self-awareness development structure that they're talking about here. In that, we're also going to be looking at effective listening, the skills of collaboration, compromise, and of course, putting all those things in practice. That's what the development is. Now, for clarification, are there any communication or mass media students in this group? No? Well, if not, maybe somebody else might be able to indicate. What do you understand by the term effective listening? Just taking one of the elements here out in terms of development. Anybody, feel free to respond. AJ, what do you feel about it? Oh, I'm hoping people are actually back, you know.
I think it's like listening effectively, like listening in terms of like analyzing what you have listened and also probably adding your own comment or opinion on it.
Nope, that's actually not effective listening at all.
I don't know. It's like saying.
All right, so effective listening asks us to do a number of things. First of all, the first thing we have to do is shut down our own analysis of somebody else. Because what happens is when we listen to people and we begin to analyze what they're saying, we are actually starting to put into the conversation our own thoughts. So that effective listening requires one of the first things is lowering our own standards and boundaries, because we tend to listen and gauge things from where we think we understand how we understand something. So now it means therefore that we come with a frame of reference and we listen from within that frame of reference. Now, if we have no experience with the topic, it's easy to dismantle that. But when we have very strong feelings about a topic or a concept or an idea, then effective listening becomes more challenging because we have to lower our own personal boundaries or barriers to that particular concept. So, for example, if you have a problem with homosexuality or the gender issues that a lot of the world is dealing with at this point in time, the minute you begin speaking to somebody about that concept with them and they're telling you something that is of a personal nature to them, we begin to listen through that frame of reference and we begin to draw assumptions about the individual and the topic, and we effectively stop listening when we do something like that. So effective listening means that we listen to understand both what is being said and to understand the individual and how they feel. So we're looking for empathy. You don't have to agree with what they have to say, but you need to dismantle what you think about the topic to be able to to listen effectively. That makes a little more sense, AJ and others?
Yes, sir.
Right. Now, do you think, AJ, that's going to be an easy thing to do?
No, because many people have different beliefs and like they'll have like their norms and their traditions and stuff. So like it might conflict with what they believe in and yeah.
Can you think of a topic that if you engage in conversation about, you would have a rough time listening effectively?
No, actually no, because I like to gain different perspectives on from different people. So I don't think I'll have a rough time.
Okay. How often when you listen to people with alternative uh, perceptions of life, do you stop them to comment?
Mm. Sorry, is that it?
One of the ways to gauge whether you're effectively listening is how much you put in. I understand. I used to do this and this and this. How many times do you find yourself doing that in a conversation?
Well, not much.
Right, and that's important. Why, I'll tell you, is because if you're making those kind of statements, it means that you are not effectively listening because you're just putting in your 2 cents and you're not listening for their position on the topic. All right. So that's something else. Anybody else? One of the things that men have been accused of in particular, and this is from a gender bias issue, is that men don't listen and we don't listen effectively. How many men here, we have a few, not many, would agree with that statement or disagree with that statement? So far, I think I see one. Yeah, here comes a man. Malik is back. Hi, Malik. I was just asking, made a statement here, and wondering if you would agree with it, that a lot of men are charged with the um, the sin of not listening. Would you agree with that, Malik, as a man?
So if men are charged with the sin of not listening,
Of not listening. Because we're discussing that as one of the leadership development tools, is that we need to be able to practice effective listening.
yeah, I would agree, honestly.
Honestly. So what can we do as men to begin to practice effective listening? Now, Malik, I don't want you to answer. Let me get a female perspective now of what they think we should be doing to listen effectively. Anybody, any lady in the class, any woman who's willing to share her point of view. And again, we are sharing point of views. So anybody? Chantal, I should say.
Sir,
Yes?
could you repeat what you just said?
So men are accused of not ever listening properly, generally, right? Now, what advice would you give to a man so that he can learn to effectively listen to other people? Not only women, but generally across the board.
I think just basically enter the conversation with an open mind and just really listen and try to see it from the perspective of the person who is speaking to you about
what,
if it's
about
or
whatever
whatever.
yeah, okay.
Yeah,
Excellent.
right? Yeah. So don't interject until they have completely finished and then try to have a calm conversation and come up with a resolution or to resolve whatever.
Well,
If it's a problem, if it's not, yeah.
half the time it's not necessary for you to come up with a solution as a listener. It is enough for you to just simply listen to the person's position and begin to try to appreciate the position that they've taken when it comes to that particular issue or problem or whatever. It is not necessarily and you see, this is the problem with men. Men automatically start to think about, well, how do I fix this? And it's sort of like programmed in us, we have to be problem solvers. Fabian, would you agree with that? That thinking I'm reflecting.
Yeah, I agree. I get buff plenty times now.
You have a significant other?
Yeah.
Uh, you're married, Mr. Mungru?
No. Together
But
for
you
like
do have a
10 years, but yeah,
yeah.
basically.
You get buff plenty. All right, I hear you. All right. So this is one of the reasons why I wanted to point out effective listening as one of the critical developmental tools, because without effective listening, you can't compromise, you can't collaborate. And effective listening is also part of listening to yourself too. Far too often we ignore our own thoughts and ideas and put it aside because we don't value it as being important to as other people's, and that's a danger that a lot of us face sometimes. All right, so foundation principles of leadership of this model. This model assumes that leadership is important to all of us. Now, generally for younger individuals, we don't look at leadership as being critical. But if you think about how many of the decisions that directly impact upon you are made by leaders around you, you'd realize that the predicament you find yourself in is a result of the leadership that's around you. So consider as a child, what takes place in your household is effectively what is effectively a result of the decisions taken by the leadership in the house. The leadership in the house is responding to decisions made by leadership outside of the home, and therefore their decision making by these individuals is impacting everybody from a very personal point of view. And that's going to be a very important thing for us to understand, that regardless of what age we're at or where we are at in society or life, the concept and impact of leadership is so all pervasive that it ought to be our concern all the time. Because a lot of us, when we're growing up, and I'm guilty of this too. I grew up and I was never interested in politics and that's them people business kind of thing. But at the end of the day, exactly what impacted upon me comes from that leadership, political or otherwise. And it's not necessarily always going to be positive, all right, good or bad. It means therefore that we ought to pay it more attention. Of course, we have to appreciate that everybody values and looks at leadership differently, and that's important for us. That leadership is not something that is static, that it's changing over time or ought to be changing over time, and not necessarily sometimes changing for the good. It could be adjusting differently, not to reflect the needs of our society. It's assuming that different types of settings call for different types of leadership. And we'll look at the leadership models. And the most important element is that leadership is something that can be learned and developed by everybody at different levels in the organization. So it requires that we commit ourselves to high ethical standards. So the relational leadership model is speaking to leadership with high ethical values. And we want to use those ethical values to encourage positive change in our society and change that is socially responsible. Now we'll come back to social responsibility, but in essence, when we say something is socially responsible, it means that whatever we're doing, whatever changes we're making, is not only good for the individual, but is also good for the community and for the world at large, the country and the world at large. It means that socially, as our society, we are making decisions that is best for everybody and not only for one part of our society. And that is a serious problem sometimes people make when issue that comes up when people make decisions. They make decisions based upon very small parameters that are that only affect themselves, but they don't think about how it impacts upon the wider society or even the immediate society around them. That therefore requires that we are able to think critically, which means we are going to be able to divorce our subjective response to things and analyze decisions and events utilizing critical thinking, which means we are going beyond subjectivity and we're thinking objectively about certain things. Critical thinking is a skill that this programs that you all are in is part of the college, what we call graduate requirements, that when you graduate, we are going to graduate you as critical thinkers, that you can look at things and look at the different angles of perspectives of one issue and try to pull together some sort of now, and when we look at another part of the theories that we're going to look at, we're going to realize that there's no one right answer to anything. It also requires that as a leader, you are credible and authentic. Now, credibility has to do with your trustworthiness. People are not going to follow you if you don't trust you, and they're not going to trust you if you're not authentic. And those things impact upon your integrity, how people view you as being a person of your word, that what you do and what you say have a very close relationship, and that your ethical conduct is within the standards that we all accept. Now, there's going to be some questions about ethical standards coming up later on. And in fact, there are two chapters, there are two presentations in the list of presentations that deal specifically with ethical decision making and ethical conduct. And that is something that you're going to have to pay attention to in those chapters, because they're very important cornerstone elements of the relational leadership model, which is why it's foundational as its principles. Now, first element here that they talk about in terms of the developmental process of the program is knowing. You must know yourself. You must know how change takes place, both in yourself and others, and how and why other people view things differently than you do. Now, an exercise in that is this first thing here. And I'm gonna ask questions here. What do you see? And I want people to volunteer. What do you see in this photograph?
Sir, a woman with her head turned to the
Looking
side.
away. Right.
Yeah, looking out.
Everybody sees that? Or everybody else sees that?
Yes, sir.
All right. Anybody sees anything different?
The thing at the bottom kind of looks like wings a little bit to me. I don't know, they're just, I don't know.
Okay, all right. But in terms of the whole image, and if you use that as the wings, what do you see? All right, so a question I will ask here now is, how many people see an old woman looking down?
Yes, sir. Just saw the old man looking down.
So I'm actually seeing both as well.
Right, so you should see both because that's the image here. And it has to do with perception. Looking at the woman looking over her shoulder is easy to see. Generally, most people see that. It takes a little while before you see the old woman looking down. Is anybody not seeing one of the two images that we're talking about? Nothing's wrong with you if you're not seeing it, huh?
I'm not seeing the old lady looking down.
All right. So follow me here. Let's see if I can get my pointer going here. All right. You see this? Let me use a different color. All right. So you see this this part here of the chin. That's the chin of the woman looking away, right? Yes?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
All right. Okay, so think about this as a nose, this as the chin here, this piece here, this as the mouth.
Sir, I'm not seeing it.
Right. So
Yeah.
anybody else had problems seeing the old woman looking down? The old woman has a scarf on her head and possibly a feather at the top there too. Everybody's okay with that? All hair, this will be her hair poking out. This will be her eyes, hair, that type of stuff. Everybody seeing that?
No.
Which one you're not seeing? The old woman still?
Yeah, still not seeing it.
All right. So, as I said before, this is the nose of the older lady here. This part. This is like the side of your nose that you have the little thing. This is one of her eyes. This is the eyelash on the other side of the nose. This is the woman's mouth, the old woman's mouth. This is her chin down there because this is like a coat that she's wearing. So she's looking down. All this hair is like a head tie. All right. This is some of her hair poking out. And this is like a feather just stuck on top of the hat. You seeing that yet?
No, still
All
not
right.
seeing it.
Now,
Okay.
you can find this image online and have a look at it in more detail. But eventually, sometimes if you turn your head from side to side, you can actually see the image switch over. Both images are there, but it's a matter of perception. And in a lot of instances, this is
Oh, I'm not seeing it.
right. Okay, so it takes a little time sometimes to see it, and that's the point of this, because the whole idea is that we need to understand that others see things differently than we do. So even though we're looking at the same thing, we are fixed on our position of. But there's a young lady looking over there. Look at this one here. What are you seeing in this picture? Let me make it large again.
So I saw
A
a
lady.
skull first.
Say what?
I saw a skull first, then I see a lady looking in a mirror.
All right, so that again, there's two images there. There's the skull that's smiling out or looking out at you, and there's a woman looking into a reflection of herself in the mirror there. Can anybody see the two images in each other? This one's a little easier, I think. The skull is the hidden image. Everybody see? Oh, sorry, I'm not seeing your hands. Sorry. Great, everybody's seeing it. Anybody not seeing it? Hands down for the guys who saw it. Anybody not seeing the two images? This one's relatively easy. Okay, so this is Chantal. You're not seeing which one? The skull.
No, so I see it. I see both of them. I see them at the same time. Sorry.
Great. Yeah, this one's a much easier one. So I should probably start with this one next time. And actually, let me do that now. Move it around so that next time we'll come to this harder one. Start with that one, this one. And this is at the end of the day what happens when we have differences in perception about things. Now, if you look at this picture, it looks funny. But remember, most people are going to argue about something only from their perspective. And because of that, it means that we can get ourselves into unnecessary conflict. You're following what's happening on the ground there? You're seeing that they're both right, but they're only right from their own perspectives. So a lot of instances, what it means is this guy needs to walk around and see what he's looking at to see how he's seeing things. And this guy needs to walk around and see what he's looking at from his end. And that's the only way we can actually truly understand sometimes other people's perceptions of things, because we have to, as they say, you have to walk a mile in that person's shoes to see the life that they're living and the life they're experiencing, to understand why they're behaving the way they do. And that's the most powerful thing you can do, is don't judge people. Understand why they think the way they do. You don't, again, you don't have to agree with their perception or their actions, but you need to understand why they did or do what they do. All right, and that's an important element that this leadership model is telling us. We need to be able to do this because we have to, if we can understand that, this is the reason why we're getting resistance to some of the things we're trying to do. Then you need to be able to walk people over to your side so that you can get them to see, hey, this is really a 6, not a 9 kind of thing. All right. And again, it's a matter of perception. So this is a very powerful symbol or image here that speaks to why we need to understand the reason why other people don't see things the way we do. And that has a lot to do with your life experiences. That's something that you have to pay attention to as well. All right, so another of the 3 principles is the being principle. If you're going to be a good leader, you must be ethical, principled, open, caring, and inclusive. Now, ethical, we've talked about. Principle is related to that. That whatever you hold to be important and thing, you maintain your principles based upon that. But what does open and caring and inclusive mean to you guys? Justin, how about you? Justin? All right. Ms. Ramsameh, what about you? What does open, caring, and inclusive mean? Or Justin, you open up your mic. Go ahead, Justin.
Could you repeat the question, please?
I'm asking, I think we could clearly understand what ethical and principled is, but what does open, caring, and inclusive mean? To you, at least.
You're being willing to let someone in.
Right? Can you illustrate a time frame or circumstance in which that should happen or could happen?
I really don't know.
All right. Okay. I was going to ask Ms. Ramsameh, you willing to contribute in this? Please. Yes, Ms. Ramsameh.
I agree with Justin. I also think it kind of means being willing to listen to anyone and not being like judgmental, referring to the inclusivity aspect.
All right. Can anybody give me right? So it's easy when it's people you like, right? If you understand what I'm talking about here, it's easy. It's easy to be open, caring, and inclusive to people who are like-minded, similar to yourself, and hold your values and ethical principles up to the same sort of value. But it's hard to be open, caring, and inclusive for people who may not necessarily be what you perceive that you want. That is where the challenge is going to come up. So being open and caring and inclusive is an important element, and it's a challenging element that we have when we're dealing with other people. And that's what Richard Branson says here. If you are to care about people, which is what we're talking about, that's probably going to be the best way he's talking about here, is that having a personality of caring about people is important. You can't be a good leader unless you generally like people. That is how you're going to bring out the best in them. And that's actually quite true. In fact, Richard Branson failed at a lot of his businesses failed. But he never gave up that whole concept of caring about the people he worked with and the people who worked for him. Now, it's easy to care about people that are similar to you or similar levels to you, but it's more and more difficult to care in a realistic fashion for people who are outside of what you consider to be your norms and people who hold to your value structure. Why? I mean, a lot of times, we're going to tackle some serious issues here that sometimes we just kind of sweep under the carpet. But one of the things we have to recognize in our country, we suffer from our own internal racial divides in our society. And those racial divides create a scenario in which we are our own worst enemy, because we don't or we harbor distrust for people simply because of their ethnic background. And that is something that we talk about. We say we care less for those people and we care more for we people. Sorry about that. All right. You get that kind of conversation taking place, and that is not what this model is saying. We have to be open, caring, and inclusive for everybody. So we have to dismantle that whole thinking process of looking at people as outside. Now, I understand, okay, so somebody's not a member of your family, that's one thing. But you can't just dismiss a whole set of individuals simply because they're different to you, or they come from a different background or ethical, not ethical, but ethnic grouping than you. That is probably the worst divider that we have. That is possibly the most damaging in our societies. Not only here in Trinidad, but around the world, we have consistently seem to be having those types of issues across the board. And that is what this principle is talking about. That we have to be what we say we want to be. All right? Because if your ethical values principles don't value that, then you can't be open and caring. So there's where the disconnect can take place. All right, so the other element of the three basics, the knowing, being, and then doing. So you must act socially responsibly. You must be consistent and congruent in your behavior as a partner or participant in your community, and you must act on your commitments and passions. So this means we have to put into practice what the two elements before have taught us about ourselves. And we have to act in such a way that we are being responsible to the society around us. Now, a lot of times we don't. So there are a couple of questions I can ask about that, but we leave it because socially responsible behavior comes up later on in this same presentation. So this is what we talk about when we talk about social responsibility. The principle that in addition to pursuing, this is for a business place, gotten from an Investmentpedia. The principle that in addition to pursuing profit generation for firms, corporations should strive to act in a way that positively affects society and the world. So, giving charity, looking after the environment, taking care of the less fortunate in our society, those are the kind of things that a lot of corporate responsibility or social responsibility speaks to. But we're actually making, in the previous thing here, we need to make sure that all of our actions are socially responsible, that we don't do things that inadvertently impact negatively on the society around us in one way or the other. That's a tall order because sometimes that can be a challenge across the board. All right. So although we just mentioned three basic principles there, or foundational principles, the process of developing into leadership or developing into a leader is not a follow step one, step two, step three kind of thing. As it says there, leadership cannot be reduced to a number of easy steps. It is realistic. It develops a way of thinking. So it's a process that we have to go through that takes time. So it's not expected that by the end of this course you'll become this great leader, but that we consistently go back and forth by looking at what we do, reviewing what we do, and trying to develop a better self moving forward, so that you may not start from a good position, but you start from where you are now, and you start to think about how you want to improve yourself. And the improvement is not just one and done, it's done constantly through your life. As you move through different spheres of activity, you start to look at how you develop that concept of thinking better, being better, knowing better. All right, because as we progress in life, who we think we are changes over time as well. All right, that's going to be something. And even those things that you held as core value beliefs in the past, they're not as important anymore as you get older and as you move on in life. Those kind of things change, and that's important for you to remember. Okay, so here we come across this concept of a paradigm. A paradigm of hard work, that solving all your problems. I don't know if any of you all remember this, but they always talked about it. You have to work hard to achieve the things that you want to do. But the concept of working hard is very simplistic, and therefore we want to encourage. Yes, we need to work hard, but we also need to work smarter. But in the developmental process, here we're talking about different types of smartness or intelligence. Collectively smarter, reflectively smarter, and spiritually smarter. So collectively smarter recognizes that the more of us involved in an activity, the more information and knowledge we will have to draw upon to make a better decision. We are collectively smarter than any one individual here. And that's a difficult thing sometimes for people to recognize and accept and act upon it. A lot of people who, especially people who are highly intelligent and highly qualified, have a really hard time understanding that the collective is better able to tackle a problem than an individual who believes they have the correct answer. And that's because there are more perspectives coming to bear on the problem than just the perspective of the one individual, which is one of the reasons why we encourage so much group work within our courses and programs in Costa, because we want you to become more comfortable working in groups as opposed to working by yourself. All right. There's always this thing, a problem shared is a problem halved, and the kind of thing. So you always lessen the load when you share your problems with others, because you're able to get help from everybody. And that's the whole nature of collectively smarter. Reflectively smarter means that we oftentimes take time to reflect on what happened in the past, to understand better what we did right, what we did wrong, and how we might be able to change what we're doing to effect a better solution or better outcome. Now, reflection takes time, but in our lifestyles where everything is get this done now and do this, when's the last time anybody here spent time reflecting on what you did in the past semester to see what you could do better in the current semester? Now, most of us like to do that New Year's. How many people have New Year's resolutions? Well, anybody made New Year's resolutions? Nobody? What kind of people? All right, sorry, I'm seeing hands up. So only 2 people made New Year's resolutions. Why? The rest of you all don't make resolutions and break them? All right, well, I'm not so thing on the resolutions, but one of the things that I think you can effectively do is over time, especially at the end of the year, reflect on how the year went. All right, but you need to be doing this often and at smaller intervals. Reflect often, because when we reflect and look back on what we did in the past, and it can't be the too distant past, it has to be the more recent past, then we might get a better perspective on why we keep on having the same outcomes. Because if you think about it, you remember what the definition of insanity is? It's doing the same things over and over and expecting different results. That's the definition of insanity. You all remember that? Anybody heard that before? That definition of insanity?
Yes, sir. I have.
Yeah. And you know how much times, this is especially true with relationships. We always do the same things over and over again, and we expect to have a better relationship with people, with somebody else. And it's because we keep on making the same mistakes over and over again. And it's because we haven't sat back and reflected upon what went wrong in the first relationship and how am I to contribute to that? It can't only be all their fault, right, ladies? I'm laughing because a lot of women always blame the men. It has to be something, and then one of the things I want you to reflect on too, if you've had a number of relationships and they failed, what are the key components of the individuals that you've been involved with in terms of similarities? This always brings me back to an age-old discussion that my friends and I had when we were growing up. So, like when I was growing up, I was considered a nerd, right? So obviously, I wasn't the kind of guy that girls would run down. But what we notice, or what I've noticed, even as an adult now, young girls tend to run down bad boys. Yes.
Not me.
Well, yes, I know not me would come up, but a lot of women at some point in time are attracted to or find themselves being attracted to these gentlemen who are quote unquote alpha males. And I think that has to do with biology and our whole system of survival and stuff like that. So there's nothing wrong with it. It's just if you look at the type of individuals you've been constantly involved with in the past and you keep on failing at the relationships or they keep on disappointing you in the relationships, then you ought to be probably looking and reflecting at, well, maybe I'm just, I like these people for the wrong reasons, kind of thing. So something for you to think about in terms of reflecting further on. But I find it's usually useful to look at that from that perspective sometimes. Now, spiritually smarter has nothing to do with religion. It has to do more with those values that we hold to be that basically govern your behavior. And if you ever want to know what are the values that you have, observe yourself when things go wrong. How you behave, what you do, and how you work through things, which is what this quotation from the text is telling us. If you want to be aware of the values, beliefs, and principles that are your primary and core principles, look at people's behavior when things are going wrong. So if when things are going wrong, you're willing to cheat and lie and that type of stuff, it means that your value system is not based upon truth and honesty. It's based on something else. It's based upon not taking responsibility. It's avoiding responsibility or something along those lines. Spiritually smarter means that you need to be aware of what your core values are and adjust those values if you want to be a leader. Because leaders who lie and cheat when things go wrong are not the kind of leaders that people ultimately want to follow. All right, far too often we come across those circumstances. Something for us to pay attention to. So this is when we speak about being smarter. This is what they refer to about being collectively smarter, reflectively smarter, and spiritually smarter. That's the hard work paradigm that they keep on talking about. All right. So what's a paradigm? Because we already introduced the concept. A paradigm is a method or way in which we look at things. Now, we're talking about paradigms in leadership. Now, a lot of paradigms or the way in which we look at leadership is that leaders are older, more experienced, and tend to have a lot of qualifications and that kind of stuff. But is that really the kind of leaders that make a difference in your life? For example, the leaders in your home, your parents, are they the most highly qualified people? Yes, no, possibly. All right. Um, who are the leaders you value in your life, who seem or appear to be the most important? You have to think about that, guys, because you again, the paradigm of what you view the way in which you go about identifying leadership and so on is something that you have to pay attention to. Yeah, be careful of that. Examine your current patterns of thinking and consider the following, that a new paradigm shift is something that is required. So the paradigm shift that we're talking about here is if we know that what we were thinking of before or how we were thinking about something is not working, then it means that we need to change. And paradigm shifting means we change the way we think about things because our previous thought processes are not working. So the paradigm shift that we're talking about here is that leadership is not something that a leader possesses so much as a process that involves followership. Now, followership is really leadership among people in the group. Now, when we speak about leadership, we don't technically hear a lot about followership. But if you think about it from a logical point of view, you cannot engage in leadership activities if you don't have people who follow. That makes sense? You can't do anything without the support of others around you. You can't lead nobody if there's nobody around to lead. All right, so you can't be a leader without followers. But the strength of any leader is dependent upon the quality and willingness of the followers in the organization or in the grouping that you're talking about there. Now, from the text, they've identified a number of these. Let me make this a little smaller because it's out of focus a little bit. All right, so these are the types of followers that we can engage or meet. We have politicians, partners, subordinates, and contributors. So if we look at this matrix here, on this axis here, we're measuring relationship initiatives from low to high and performance initiatives from low to high. So the kind of individuals you want in your organization or followers that you would like to have would be those that are partners, because they are the ones who are high on performance and high in relationship. But the problem with partners is that partners can challenge you as a leader. And not everybody is willing to put in the effort for that type of partnership potential. A good person is a contributor, somebody who's not good on the relationship developmental processes that are necessary as leadership requires, but they're willing to put in work to get things done. So they are contributors because they are high performance people, but low relational. Then you have the politicians, those opposite to the contributor, those that love the relationship aspect, but they don't do anything. They're the ones who talk a lot, but don't do anything. So, and then of course you have the last one, the subordinates, who's low on everything. And they have a high level of dependency. You need to be on them all the time. Now, one of the things that I've actually I usually ask students to do here is think about this as the people in your groups that you've worked in the past. How many people in your group, and where do you fall? Are you when you operate in groups for group activities, are you partners, politicians, contributors, or subordinates? Now, most people will probably want to say, I was a partner. But I mean, be honest to yourself and evaluate yourself and think about if at any point in time you're already a contributor or politician, or maybe even a subordinate in some instances. And that might be as a result of the degree of importance you've put onto that nature of that group activity. So even this little group that you're with, the groups of 2 and one group of 3 that we have, you might have a situation where you will fall into one of these categories as a follower in your grouping. But if you think about it from a leadership perspective now, these are the kind of followers that you're going to engage with. Now, another model actually widens this to 7 types of followers: loyalists, sycophants, critics, opportunists. I'm reading this way around clockwise. Opportunists, spectators, traitors, and realists. Who are you? Do you get all of these concepts as, you know, which ones would you prefer? And then, unfortunately, in as organizations begin to get larger and larger, and your following gets wider, you're going to encounter all of these types of individuals in your followership. And you also have to think about who you are in an organization that you fall into. So it's something that you want to pay attention to in terms of, if you are a leader or in leadership positions, you need to be aware of these types of follower types. And if you are a follower, be aware of which groupings you're falling into, and do you like where you are? All right, that kind of thing. So pay attention to this. This is just another model of the basic follower types that came from the textbook here, from this model here, and I felt that it kind of broadened things out, especially in political organizations. You can see this really holding to that particular type of developmental process that we could talk about. All right, what are the responsibilities of followers? Followers, of course, support the leader in their actions and what they have to do, the plans. Followers take initiative. They don't have to wait to be told to do something. They do it. They play counseling and coaching roles, coaching other followers, and possibly even coaching the leader in areas that they need help, counseling the leader when necessary, as well as others. Raising issues and concerns when necessary, seeking and encouraging honest feedback from everybody, both from above and below and around you, clarifying your role and expectations with us. You want to know what exactly you're doing and why you expect to do it, and what are the expectations of the leader of you. Showing appreciation to leaders, that's important. Keeping the leaders informed, and resisting inappropriate influences of leaders. Now, that's an important one, because a lot of leaders who are more of the maximum type, it's my way or the highway, they don't like any followers raising issues and concerns or resisting their influences, because those things, this is especially with what we'll call negative leaders or leaders with a high level of inconsistent behavior. They have a tendency to not want other people to point out where they're going wrong. And that is a responsibility of a good follower. A lot of leaders don't like all of these roles, because it means at times they will challenge the leadership and why they're making certain decisions. So asking a question as to, well, why are we doing this, is not a bad thing. You need to think about it from that perspective as well, because it means it's going to keep you honest. Your followers keep you honest in terms of, well, you shouldn't be doing this, or you ought not to be doing this, or why are we doing this, or why are you doing that? Those are questions that as a leader you should expect from your followers, and as a follower you should be asking of your leaders. If you belong to an organization where there's some sort of structure and stuff, what if any role do you play, and do you have these types of these actions that you take with it? Now, what are your competencies as a follower? For all of us, we display loyalty. We function well in changing environments. That's important, because change is the only constant in life. We function well on teams. That's something that we keep on asking about. We think independently and critically. That's important, and a lot of leaders might discourage that, independent and critical thinking, because if you can think independently and critically, you can question decisions made by leadership. And we consider integrity of the most important, the integrity of the leader, and the integrity of the organization, and the integrity of ourselves. Those become critical and the most important for us. So understand that being a follower is not just like sheep walking around the place, which actually brings us to this question. If those are the competencies and responsibilities as followers, is followers the best way to call them? Can you suggest another name that we could utilize to describe people in organizations who basically are followers? Can anybody give us another explanation or another phrase? What would you suggest?
So is subordinate a good one?
Nope, that's even worse.
So a contributor.
There you go, contributor. Anybody else? Anybody working in an organization that uses the term associates instead of subordinates? No? Well, that's a term that you could use as opposed to a follower. This is the leader and these are my associates. You understand? It does not, the word follower is almost, it feels almost like a derogatory statement. All right, so that brings us to followers and how they behave, whether or not they're passive as opposed to being active, whether or not they're independent and critical thinking or dependent and uncritical thinking. So in this matrix here, we're looking at where people may fall in organizations. Now, think of yourself in our society today and try to think about it from the perspective of where are you in the political sphere around you today? Are you an effective follower of your government? Let's be clear. Critically thinking, independent, and highly active with the political things here. Does your organization or does the government allow for us to be critical and independent thinking, or do we have to toe the line? Are we just uncritical thinking? We're highly dependent. Yes, people. Are we sheep? We don't do nothing. We're just there for the bear, and wherever the leader says to go, we go. We're very passive. We just do what we're told, and we don't question. Or are you falling in the category of an alienated follower? Somebody who's capable of thinking critically, but is just unwilling to do anything because they just sort of resign themselves. Far too often, I find myself as an alienated follower of our government, and it's and this doesn't matter with which party's in power. Generally, I've fallen into this category in numerous instances over numerous administrations. When I think about it from that perspective, I stay in my corner, do what I have to do, do my job as effectively as I can. But when it comes to the wider environment and politics in general, I tend to be, very critical of them, but unwilling to take a stand against individuals because I feel as if my voice has no meaning and it has no impact. How many of you might fall into that category, or where do you think you fall in this spectrum that this author has brought up? Anybody? Or never thought about yourself in this perspective? Food for thought. Again, this PowerPoint is downloadable as well, okay? All right, leadership styles. So we have to examine all these styles and we'll examine them in a lot more detail later on. So you have the classical version of leadership, which is the laissez-faire, autocratic, participative. Those are the things. You have situational leadership, leadership that emerges based upon or develops based upon the situation that you're in. Emergent, that'll be people who are groomed to kind of emerge in an organization. Transactional leadership is where leadership is based upon you do this and you get this. So a transaction. Transformational leadership, which is probably one of the more powerful forms of leadership, where you are getting people to change based upon you being able to encourage them to want to change for themselves. That's and visionary would be the type of leadership style where you paint a picture of the future and you get people to work towards it. So you create a vision and you are able to motivate people to want to achieve that vision, even if you're not going to be around for it. It creates that type of vision. A lot of people see Walt Disney as being a visionary because he was the person who envisioned the Disneyland and the whole scope of animation and children's entertainment. Basically, talked about that. You can look at the life of Walt Disney and see how he was seen as a visionary leader. And a lot of times, visionary leadership runs the risk of being out of step with current reality because they are paying attention to what they see down the road, that they disconnect from the now. And that can create some sort of problems for people who follow those types of individuals because it's difficult to get things done if your focal point is further down the road where nobody's actually at that point in time. All right. So the leader is any person who actively engages with other people to accomplish any type of change. Now, I'm saying change here in a general sense, but what we are hoping is that it's a positive change that is socially responsible. Leadership's purpose is to motivate people, not just employees, attain whichever organizational goals the organization has, ensure that the rules or the values that we have are adhered to, provide continuity from one project to another, and momentum, help people move along and say, okay, we've achieved this, now let's move on to this and keep on moving. Embrace and foster change because leaders have to act by example, that they act for the common good, that they whatever they're doing is grounded in what is best for everybody. And that is everybody within the organization. That they are socially responsible, which means they are also going to be responsible for beyond the organization, that they engage in civic engagement or they participate in civic activities and they show a sense of civic responsibility. Now let's clarify those things a little more. Social responsibility is a person's commitment to the well-being of people, the world, and the broader society and the public good. We spoke about that in other parts here, so we don't need to stay on that. Civic engagement is a heightened sense of responsibility for all of the communities, our working community, social community, our family, and our living community, which is the residents that we have. We pay attention. And you know, a simple thing about civic engagement is how many of you all would cut the grass in front of your home or clean the sidewalk in front of your home, depending on where you live. A lot of people don't do those things because they see it as other people's jobs. All right. I remember a long time ago, there's this guy I used to work on the road with in terms of doing sales. And you know, lunchtime we'd have lunch while we're moving from one place to the other. And he'd be drinking soft drinks in glass bottles and he'll pelt it out the window of the car into the side of the road. I said, man, when you do that, you don't think you're making a mess of the environment? He said, no, that's somebody else's job. And that's the kind of attitude that a lot of people had when it comes to you know, doing things. And it would of course progress from just throwing glass bottles to throwing plastic and whatever. We do that. I mean, as a society in Trinidad, we are absolutely disgusting when it comes to dealing with all garbage, throwing things all over the place. It's ridiculous the amount of garbage that just accumulates on the side of the road from simply those things happening. It's really, really ridiculous. And it's something that is part of our civics and civic engagement. We don't seem to hold our societies responsible. So these are actions that we consider civil engagement. Participating and volunteering in your community or in wider communities. How many of you all here actually take part in some sort of voluntary activities in your community? Or is everything really just tied up in work and school and that kind of stuff? There's something for you to think about. That will then lead to your commitment to making positive contributions to the society around you and the community. Civic skills, the ability to involve in civil society, politics, and democracy. And social cohesion, meaning that we develop a sense of reciprocity, trust, and bonding to others. Now, what does that mean? It means that we don't remain suspicious because we are isolated or insular from other societies around us or other communities around us. So, you know, this kind of, in Sandy Grande, they used to have this Gaza and this kind of gang warfare that takes place in different parts of Trinidad. it speaks to that. There's a lack of social cohesion because there's no sense of reciprocity with certain parts of the communities. The different parts of the community seem to be warring with each other. We don't trust each other, and therefore, because we don't trust each other, we can't bond with each other for the betterment of the entire society. And those are things that are happening because of a lack of civic engagement. We're not taking part in the communities. We're not helping out in community activities. Those kind of things. When's the last time anybody here took part in some sort of community activity? Now, the community could be within the school environment, within your home environment, or your work environment. So there are 3 environments that you can participate in. Anybody? Nobody? Anybody willing to share? Hard questions. Civic responsibility, the sense of personal responsibility that you should feel towards upholding the obligation of part of any community. So let's look at this because it sounds far-fetched and hoity-toity, but it's very simple. How many of y'all follow, for those of you who drive, maintain the speed limit? No response? Y'all don't drive?
So I don't drive, but I experienced something today. I travel, right? And while I was in the taxi, the driver broke, like he just speed past the red light, like he didn't stop as he was supposed to. And
did you say anything?
I didn't say anything, but I just stared at him because I felt like if I said anything, it would have caused an argument.
And would have dropped you out.
Yeah. So I was done on the main road already, but that happened to me today, and I thought it was very reckless. Because if it was on your own, cool, fine, you're endangering your own life. But when you have passengers in the car, you're supposed to act a little bit more responsible. Not a little bit. Act responsible more. Because yeah.
Because if it was found that if he got in an accident, somebody got injured, his insurance wouldn't hold if he was breaking the law, right?
Yes, sir.
All right. So, any of you all ever did any of these things here? I mean, look at the things. Action required by law: jury duty, going to school, obeying the law, paying taxes. Actions taken that society that a citizen should take. All right, this is our responsibility. Volunteering for community service, voting. A lot of people don't see the need to do that. Serving in the military. Now we don't have that. That here, serving in the military is we don't have like voluntary arms of military activities, because that takes a lot of money to develop. Displaying patriotism. This is an important one because a lot of times the only time we display patriotism is when we have something like when the football team does something good or something happens, you see an outpouring of patriotism. But generally, how patriotic are people? I'm not asking for an answer. I'm just telling you these are things that, as being socially responsible and showing civic responsibility, these are some of the things that we need to be doing. But that story about the obeying of laws, in terms of the story that you gave me, Chantal, there about the breaking of the lights. Were you the only person in the taxi, or were there other people there?
No, sir. It was a full taxi.
And nobody else?
No one said anything, maybe because they probably thought the same thing that I was thinking. They was trying to avoid conflict, trying to avoid an argument, just want to reach home and get out of the car because this person is crazy, it seems. The
other action that you could have done, what was the alternative action that you could have taken?
So in that moment, I didn't have any alternative action in mind.
No, I mean, not saying what you had. What were some of the other things that you could have possibly done?
With regards to addressing what he did,
First off, would be speaking up, right?
well, yeah, I probably would have raised the question and asked, didn't you see the light was on red?
Yep.
I probably would have asked him that, yeah.
Yeah. And the danger is that one of the problems that we face here is something, and again, this will come up in one of your presentations, one of your chapters, is something called moral muteness. You know something is wrong, but we say nothing because we are either A, uncomfortable with tackling it, or B, we are afraid of the possible consequences when we say something or bring it up. Now, moral muteness is a sickness that kind of infects us, and we start to develop almost like a thick skin to the behavior of other people. And interestingly, that circumstance that or example you brought up about the taxi is one that speaks to that wider type of moral muteness, because we allow law breaking in small ways all the time. Speeding, breaking lights, being discourteous on the road, that type of stuff as passengers. But we have a right as a passenger to tell our drivers, hey, my life is worth more than getting home 1 minute earlier than now, that kind of thing. But a lot of people are afraid to speak up because they're afraid of the ridicule that they may face or the possible punishments that they could probably get. And unfortunately, that's endemic in our society. Yes?
So I feel like it was more, although you are correct, but I feel like I was more thinking about, like, okay, let's say if I raised the question and he did not give an answer that I liked, like it wasn't satisfactory to me, like he was kind of careless, or he just said something and he wasn't understanding the seriousness of the conversation. I probably would have, this would now be, my emotional state probably would have gotten out of hand. So instead of like raising the question, I just say, you know what, maybe if I didn't get an answer that wasn't appropriate, it would have probably
escalate.
Yes.
But
So I say, let me just maintain my peace and just,
right, but but this is
like,
when we have to engage in critical thinking, because
yeah,
we have to be able to engage somebody in a discussion about something of dire importance and of moral dimensions without escalating into direct conflict, all right, and emotional conflict. I see Naomi wants to make a contribution. Go ahead.
So I think sometimes too it is kind of be like, okay, even if they say this, like, okay, this is wrong or whatever, the chances of the person really caring and moving on with their life and still doing it anyways, because they just giving you one drop and like they might not ever see you again, or they might just like, you kind of have a feeling, okay, even if I say something, they probably wouldn't care or take it on, so it might not be effective at all. Does like cross your mind too, so you might just not let say anything.
Yeah, but then that leads to an overall type of attitude of apathy. So we just say nothing, do nothing, because we know nothing is going to be. It's the same thing like we don't complain about things too much, in particular in this country, because we know even if we do complain, it makes no difference. All right, guys, give me 1 second. Let me just respond to this call. All right, sorry about that. So we were talking about apathy, and I love the discussion that you brought up there in terms of that simple little action that has so much dimensions to it, and hopefully we'll come across more of those as we proceed through the class. And I want people to engage in discussions like this because it brings to mind the challenge that we face in developing good leadership qualities in people moving forward. All right. So this is the part that we bring up to should a leader know everything? And that's an important question because a lot of people have the idea that the leaders tend to be infallible or should be infallible. The reality is that no leader knows everything, nor should they expect to know everything. And that's something that a lot of people in leadership are afraid of letting people know. Like the hardest thing for a trainee person to say is, I don't know. Ask somebody now how to get there here and how to get to there. They might quicker tell you all kind of stories, but you'll never get. But they wouldn't say, I don't know. All right. Now, if therefore the leader does not know everything, then the leader should be open to learning. And that speaks to the way in which your organization is set up, leadership and learning, so that we recognize that all of us are smarter than just the one. And therefore, we as leaders and as followers should be open to learning across the board, which then takes us to the whole organization learning, and therefore starts to talk to us about the learning environment that we create, or the environment that we create that is inclusive of continuous learning in the organization or among the teams. So this speaks to now a learning model that was developed as well. In terms of what we're able to do is a combination of our capabilities, that's our skills, our willingness or desire, and our focus. That will be the drive to be able to do something. So what we want to do is to get to that point of the intersection of all three. We want the organization to develop the skills necessary for learning, for continuous learning, have the willingness for people to participate, and the drive to want to do it, to be able to get that. That's one learning model. This is another learning model here. Many of us learn this way. We start by conceptualizing something. So we start from the conceptualization process. Think about something, we apply it, we look at the experience, reflect on it, and we make critical inquiry about how did it work, and it means that if there are changes to be made, then we send it back to the conceptualization, make changes, apply it, and put it. Anybody knows this model? Familiar with this model? And then only when we've tested it a number of times would it become theory, and that theory is then applied in the real world around us. No? Yeah, anybody ever came across the concept of the scientific method? Don't we have some science-based students here? Even social sciences utilize the same model of scientific methodology moving forward. All right, this is a form of learning that takes place. It's one of the forms that learning will take place. Now, the best learners or the best organizations that exist and the ones that survive the longest are the ones that are learning environments, because the environment that you exist in is changing constantly, and you need to be relearning and discarding old information and old knowledge and old processes and pulling in the new ones. So that means that we live in a world in which we have to remain lifelong learners. For example, I didn't think I'd have been here teaching classes online. I mean, we were in the process of setting up online classes, but it wasn't going to be the mainstay of the college in the past. But given the pandemic, we had to shift and move quickly. Understand? And that change in environmental and pressure is causing us to want to have to change. Well, not causing. We had to change, or else we would have failed. That makes sense. Same thing with you guys. A lot of you all probably prefer the more traditional approach to education, where you're sitting in a classroom and you're listening to somebody going on and on and that kind of stuff, as opposed to the various methodologies that you're meeting in your online classes. You have those that are fully lecture mode. So I'm going to combine lecture mode and other activities here. In other classes, I don't have this approach. I have a different what we call um, not synchronous but asynchronous type classes. You'll probably, hopefully, understand what I mean when I talk about those things. And the only way that we were able to do that was that we went back into the classroom, started to learn, and as a result, one of the things I found myself doing is learning for myself how to go and do things on my own. Like I don't ever call the school and ask them, well, how do I do this and how do I do it? I just find my own solutions. And I don't find that I need to be bothering the college for every 2 seconds for everything. Software needs, um, infrastructural needs in terms of what I require here. I'm basically running my own studio here, running classes and whatnot. So it becomes, what I do need is their platforms and their things. Those are the things that they can provide. All the materials that I need, I have to go and look for it my own, buy my own textbooks, get my own stuff. And it's because the college has been able to engage in me or instill in me the concept that as long as you're alive, you're going to learn. And I mean, if you really think about it, even when you die, you learn the biggest lessons in life. I mean, what's next? I mean, we'll never know until we die. So as long as we're alive, we keep on learning. And the best organizations are those organizations that constantly redefine themselves and learn and grow. And I hope you all are working and engaging in organizations that encourage that kind of stuff. Um, and for you, as potential leaders in the future, this is the kind of organization you want to try and envisage and create and help in creating, or even work in that type of stuff. One of the strongest ways, or the most I have found, the best ways to learn things is through the experience. Um, and this is where the information here comes from the text. It says, we come to new information by one of two ways: by doing something, which is a concrete experience, or by thinking about something, which is the abstract experience. Now, let's think about this. I had an abstraction feeling, I thought, hey, I wanna learn how to do this. I wanted to learn how to repair guitars. I'm a guitarist. I have a lot of guitars, and when something goes wrong, I usually have to send it to somebody to get it repaired, and that type of stuff. And I started to myself, I'm finding myself with a little more time on my hands. Can I think about fixing my own guitars? And I said, okay, abstract concept, right? So I started the research. I started doing looking at videos and do some reading online and whatnot. And then I took a guitar and I started to work on it. And I started to realize, well, wait, this is something I can actually do. I invested in some equipment and some stuff. And now I do exactly that. I now moved from the abstract, went through the process of learning, and start to actually act upon it. And then as I do it, I think about it some more, come back. Hey, this is a better method of doing this, and so on. And I keep on. It's a never-ending process. And for you, especially any of these skills like the radiographers and stuff, every time you perform a task or a particular type of exercise, you're going to realize that you're going to get better. And if you think about what you're doing, then it's going to get even better the next time you do it. Because every time you do it, you get to practice, and that practice allows you to improve upon your processes moving forward. Would you agree with something like that?
Yes, sir.
This is the model that most of us, and the reason why it's one of the strongest methodologies is because it's based in both all three learning platforms, which is auditory, we listen, we hear, we read, visual learning, and tactile learning, doing things. All three elements of learning can work in this process of developing experiential learning. All right, how many of you all know your learning preferences? So if you're unaware of your learning preferences, actually in the e-classroom here, I have a link to a learning style inventory. Have any of you all ever done this? It's actually linked to something called the VARC learning styles. And it's a questionnaire that you do. And you're either going to be, well, it's going to look at your preference, visual, oral, read, write, or kinesthetic, which is your strongest perception. And this will be able to teach you how, well, not teach you, but it's going to indicate how you prefer to learn. So I'd like you all to actually do this particular, you don't need to worry about this. You're just going to, what is your learning preference? Just click on this and it takes you to the questionnaire. There's some ads and whatnot that come up, so you don't worry yourself about that. All right. And the questionnaire is very simple, straightforward. You know, you choose the box, the answer question is going to give you a report, and it tells you what you are, what type of learner you are, or what your learning preferences are. Something that you could pay attention to. That makes sense? And the other one is for another element that comes with the one of the other chapters. We'll get back to that in a while. But your learning preferences is important because if you understand how you learn best, then you will actually create the various environments that you want to be in that maximizes your learning potential. That makes sense? All right. So you can marry that VARC learning thing. Any of you all ever did that before?
Yes, sir, I did it already.
How long ago you did it?
About about 2 semesters ago.
All right. You could also.
First semester and the first year we also did a VARC.
All right. You should do it again though, because over time things change. All right. I saw somebody else had their hand up as have I done it before? All right, no worries. Okay, well, that kind of brings us to the end of this particular chapter. This presentation here included the introduction to the text as well as chapter 1. And I like to wrap it up by looking at these quotations here that I pulled, one from the text and a couple from other things. Leadership is a role open to anybody. Leadership is living by a personal set of rules in which you motivate others to do the right thing, be engaged in the world, and to listen to others and their concerns. Leadership is focused on the other person. And I found this quote from the textbook from this student here, Chandra Johnson, to be probably the best summing up of what the model that we are going to look at examines or espouses in terms of the philosophy moving forward. And this one here kind of supports the same concept as well. Everybody is a leader because everybody influences somebody else. You might not think you're influencing people, but if you look in your lives, there are people with whom you are influencing, especially younger siblings and children. You are influencing other people. And you may not be aware that you are doing it, but be careful, because that means you're leading them to do bad things if you're doing bad things. Because if you think about it, who taught you how to cuss? Ask yourself that question. Where did you learn to swear? All right. So it's not a privilege. Leadership is not the privilege of the few. Everybody can be leaders. And in fact, you and I should be leaders. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. I'd like you to, if you can, oops, I made some changes, so I need to save that. I'd like you to in the e-classroom, if you get a chance, this is the chapter 2 here, is something that you can probably go through on your own. So that way we could engage in more discussion rather than just simply going through. The other 2 chapters are much longer than this one and a lot more dense. So I would ask you to download the presentations and have a look at them if at all possible. I will then load the recordings for today here. It will be sessions 1, part 1 and part 2, because it's broken up into 2 things, 2 sections. All right, any questions anybody wants to ask at this point? Any questions at all? I know it was pretty long. We're just at 8:30, which means it's wrapping up time. All right, if there are no questions, I'm going to stop the recording.